You've made yourself the default explanation for other people's moods for years without ever deciding to. A silence becomes evidence, a short reply becomes a verdict, and somewhere in the space of a few seconds you've already built a case against yourself for a crime nobody has actually named. This isn't low self-esteem in the way people usually mean it. There's a very specific reason your mind reaches for blame before it reaches for anything else, and it's not really about what's happening right now. Let's call her Anna. She's 26. Her roommate comes home from work and barely says hello before disappearing into her room. Anna's stomach immediately tightens. She starts running through the day. Did I leave dishes in the sink again? Was I too loud on my call this morning? Did something I said yesterday land wrong? She knocks gently, asks if everything's okay, and her roommate says, honestly, yeah, just a brutal day at work. Sorry, I'm not great company right now. Nothing to do with Anna at all. A completely ordinary, unrelated bad day. Anna feels relief for about 30 seconds. Then a familiar thought arrives anyway. Maybe I should have noticed she seemed off this morning. Maybe I could have done something. The blame doesn't fully leave. It just relocates, finding a new angle to attach itself to, even after the actual explanation has nothing to do with her. This happens constantly for Anna, in situations far smaller than this one. A friend cancels plans. She assumes she said something wrong. A text goes unanswered for a few hours. She wonders what she did. Her mind doesn't seem to have a setting for, this has nothing to do with me. It only has settings for, how is this my fault? And occasionally, how is this my fault that I didn't see coming? If this sounds familiar, the instant self-scan, the quiet assumption that you're somehow the reason, even when there's no evidence pointing that way, this isn't a character flaw. It's a very old, very specific adaptation. Here's what's actually happening. For a lot of people who default to self-blame, this pattern started as a genuinely useful survival strategy in an unpredictable environment. If you grew up around a caregiver whose mood shifted unpredictably, someone who could become upset, withdrawn, or angry for reasons that weren't always clear to a child, your developing brain faced a specific problem. Unpredictable danger is far scarier than danger you can trace back to a cause. So children in that situation often do something remarkable, if quietly tragic. They assign themselves the cause. Not because it's accurate, but because a world where I did something wrong explains the parent's mood is more manageable than a world where the parent's mood is simply random and outside anyone's control. If you caused it, you can theoretically prevent it next time. If it's random, you're powerless. The child's mind chooses the version that feels less helpless, even if it means constantly blaming itself. This becomes a deeply wired default. When something around you shifts unexpectedly, your first instinct isn't to investigate the actual cause. It's to scan your own recent behavior for the explanation, because that's the search your nervous system was trained to run first, long before it learned to consider other people's independent inner lives. But here's the part almost nobody says out loud. Self-blame isn't really humility, and it isn't really about accuracy. It's a bid for control disguised as guilt. Believing this is my fault feels bad, but it's a specific, familiar kind of bad. And underneath it is the comforting illusion that if you just figure out exactly what you did, you can fix it, prevent it, undo it. Believing this has nothing to do with me and I have no control over it is actually the scarier option for a mind wired this way, because it means sitting with genuine uncertainty and helplessness. This is why the guilt often persists even after clear evidence disproves it, like Anna's roommate directly explaining her bad day had nothing to do with her. The relief is real but brief, because the underlying system isn't actually processing evidence. It's running an old survival calculation that says, assuming responsibility, even false responsibility, feels safer than accepting that some things are simply outside your control. There's a painful irony here. People who default to self-blame are often the most conscientious, most attuned people in a room, the ones most likely to actually notice when something's wrong. But that same sensitivity gets hijacked into constant, exhausting self-monitoring as if every shift in someone else's mood is a referendum on their own worth. This shows up in different forms. There's the person who, when their boss seems stressed in a meeting, immediately assumes it's about their own performance, even when the boss is dealing with something completely unrelated. There's the person who, after any disagreement, replays their own words obsessively looking for the offending phrase, while barely considering that the other person might have simply been having a hard day or reacting to something from their own life entirely. There's the person who apologizes reflexively when someone bumps into them, when a waiter brings the wrong order, when literally anything goes slightly wrong nearby, treating proximity to a problem as evidence of causing it. In every version, the same quiet reflex is running. Something shifted, so it must be about me, so I must have caused it. The mind reaches for blame before it reaches for curiosity. Here's the twist most people never consider. The goal isn't to force yourself to stop caring what impact you might have on others. That empathy is actually valuable, and losing it would cost you something real. The goal is to add one missing step before the blame arrives, an actual investigation instead of an automatic verdict. The real shift happens when, in that moment of tightening, the instant self-scan, you pause and ask a more specific question. Is there actual evidence this is about me, or am I just filling in an unknown with the explanation that feels most familiar? Often, when you actually check, there's no real evidence at all, just an unexplained shift, and an old reflex rushing in to fill the blank with your own name. This distinction matters enormously because it separates genuine accountability, noticing you've actually done something and wanting to repair it, from automatic self-blame, which assigns fault reflexively, regardless of whether any actually exists. Real accountability is specific and evidence-based. Automatic self-blame is diffuse and happens before any evidence is even gathered. So the next time someone goes quiet or seems off, or reacts in a way you don't immediately understand, notice the instant pull toward blaming yourself before you've actually looked for a reason. You don't have to accept every unexplained moment as evidence against you. Other people have entire inner lives, bad days, unrelated stresses, and moods that have nothing to do with you at all. That was true even back when it didn't feel safe to believe it. And you were never actually the cause of everything that went wrong around you. You just learned once that believing you were felt safer than accepting you weren't in control. You're allowed to let that belief go now. The world was never actually that centered on you, and that's not a loss. It's relief.